Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another installation of History and Truth. Today, we are again at Ishida Castle in the Goto Islands at Nagasaki. We are commemorating the first month, August 1914, the first month of hostilities leading into the Miracle of the Marne and the retreat to the Aisne, as is described in Barbara Tuchman's book, The Guns of August. Today is a book report. The Guns of August, published in the UK as August 1914, is a 1962 book centered on the first month of World War I, written by Barbara W. Tuchman. After introductory chapters, Tuchman describes in great detail the opening events of the conflict. The book's focus then becomes a military history of the contestants, chiefly the great powers. The Guns of August provides a narrative of the earliest stages of World War I, from the decisions to go to war up until the start of the Franco-British offensive that stopped the German advance into France. The result was 4 years of trench warfare. In the course of her narrative, Tuchman includes discussion of the plans, strategies, world events, and international sentiments before and during the war. The book was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for General Nonfiction for publication year 1963 and proved very popular. Tuchman later returned to the subject of the social attitudes and issues that existed before World War I in a collection of 8 essays published in 1966 as The Proud Tower, a portrait of the world before the war, 1890 to 1914. Synopsis. The funeral of King Edward VII in May 1910 introduces Kaiser Wilhelm II and his relationship with the British monarchy, pivotal elements in the looming conflict. The remaining 21 chapters of the book are grouped into 3 parts: plans, outbreak, and battle. Plans delves into the pre-war military strategies of the 4 major European powers. Germany. Schlieffen's plan to avoid a 2-front war involved attacking France through Belgium with a strong right wing, but his successor, Moltke, weakened the plan, leading to assumptions of a swift victory that were overly optimistic. France. After decades of defensive strategies following their defeat at Sedan, France adopted General Joffre's Offensive Plan 17 in 1913, emphasizing attack and broad operational plans. Britain. The military cooperation with France evolved from informal arrangements to a formal naval agreement, and Britain preparing to deploy the BEF, but these initiatives were supported by a narrow and fragile political will. Russia. Despite internal weaknesses and corruption, Russia's massive army planned an invasion of eastern Prussia, prompting Germany to prepare reactive strategies to protect this critical territory. Outbreak meticulously chronicles the events that led Europe into war, hour by hour, between August 1st and 4th, 1914. On August 1st, Germany ordered general mobilization. Its offensive might have taken a radically different direction if the Kaiser, on the basis of a misunderstood telegram from London, had managed to convince Moltke to change plans. But Moltke prevailed and Luxembourg was invaded. France declared general mobilization on the same day in response to Germany's ultimatum to Russia, while in London, Asquith's divided cabinet failed to move. On August 2nd, 1914, Germany presented Belgium with an ultimatum, which King Albert rejected. On August 3rd and 4th, political leaders in Germany, France, Belgium, and Britain unified their nations behind the war imperative. Germany declared war on France and invaded Belgium, which triggered Britain's entry into the war. with only a few leaders foreseeing a prolonged conflict. Battle extensively details 3 of the 4 European military fronts of August 1914. The Western Front, the Battle of the Frontiers, which is chapters 11 to 14, the Battle of Ideas, which is chapter 17, and the fighting in France up to the beginning of the First Battle of the Marne, chapters 19 to 22. The Eastern Prussia Front is covered in chapters 15 and 16. The Sea Front, the Adriatic Campaign, chapter 10, and more generally, the strategies of the 3 main naval forces, the UK, Germany, and the US, which is chapter 18. The afterword reflects on the First Battle of the Marne, highlighting the deadlock and immense human and material costs on the Western Front. Despite the Allies' eventual success in saving Paris, the war's initial battles failed to be decisive and resulted in a war of attrition. The next 4 years of war were mostly determined by the events that took place in August 1914. Summary by chapters. Chapter 1, a funeral. Here is a picture of Joffre, Poincaré, King George V, French, General French of the British, and General Haig. Chapter 1, a funeral. On May 20th, 1910, of the 9 kings who led the funeral of King Edward VII, Kaiser Wilhelm II had conflicted views on his deceased uncle. In public, he was the gravest and most affectionate and attentionate mourner. In private, he scorned Edward's personal diplomacy, which supported Britain's shift from isolation to alliances with former foes France and Russia, calling his uncle Satan for plotting to encircle Germany. Wilhelm's inner tension reflected a wider polarization around the question of Germany's rise, illustrated by 2 influential books. In The Great Illusion, Norman Angell demonstrated that any war between the large states was impossible because of its exorbitant cost, whereas General von Bernhard argued in Germany and the next war that his nation had to either attack and annihilate France or accept its downfall. On that May morning of 1910, the sun of the old world was setting in a dying blaze of splendor never to be seen again. Plans. Chapter 2. Let the last man on the right brush the channel with his sleeve. To avert a 2-front war, Schlieffen saw it as a military necessity to attack France via Belgium, whose perpetual neutrality was guaranteed internationally since 1839. If Germany threw 7/8 of its 1.5 million soldiers against France, it could beat it in 6 weeks before turning to Russia. Influenced by Clausewitz and the recent decisive victories over Austria and France, Schlieffen's plan aimed to march 34 active and 20 reserve divisions through Belgium. Such a strong right wing would envelop the French armies and rake in the BEF. Schlieffen presumed that Belgium would merely protest, but the Kaiser, who wanted more assurance, unsuccessfully attempted to bribe King Leopold II by promising him French territories and money. Moltke, who succeeded Schlieffen in 1906, weakened the right wing at each new iteration of the war plan. His version of June 1914 saw Paris capitulate 39 days after mobilization, but assumed delusively that every possible contingency could be planned for. Chapter 3, The Shadow of Sedan. The humiliating defeat at Sedan set France on the defensive for 40 years. 16 war plans were produced, each defensive, but her direction changed a few years to 1914 after it gradually regained confidence in itself as a nation, and General Foch planted the seed of the mystique of the will in the military doctrine. The war council, pressed by the war minister Miss-Me, replaced in 1911 the defensive General Michel with General Joffre, who developed Plan 17. The first offensive war plan adopted by the War Council in May 1913 and ready for distribution to generals in February 1914. Its bold goal, go to Berlin via Mainz, was not supported by a detailed operational war plan like Schlieffen's, but instead emphasized the Army's imperative, attack, and laid out war options that generals could implement depending on circumstances. Chapter 4. A single British soldier. Russia's defeat to Japan in 1905 precipitated Germany in probing France, in Morocco, and Britain in developing military arrangements with France after Campbell Bannerman authorized Wilson to open informal works with his French counterpart. But this embryonic military cooperation waned after the first Moroccan crisis subsided. It re-emerged in 1910 when Wilson used his new position of Director of Military Operations and his friendship with Foch to reinvigorate joint war plans, just in time for the Second Moroccan Crisis of 1911, whose aftermath was a shake-up of the Royal Navy's top brass, a naval agreement between Britain and France, and a non-binding mutual support of their armies. Wilson delivered Plan W by the spring of 1914. Britain's military was ready to deploy the BEF and 145,000 men to France, but the British political leaders were not. Only the few involved in the CID were aware of these military commitments. Chapter 5. The Russian Steamroller. Notwithstanding its defeats, Crimea in 1856, Manchuria in 1905, and defects, Russia's imposing 6.5 million men army unsettled Germany and reassured France and Britain, its triple Entente allies. After the defeat to Japan, Grand Duke Nicholas, as chair of the Council of National Defense, initiated military reforms, but these were thwarted in 1908 when the Conservatives dissolved it. The same year, Sukhomlinov became Minister of War. Corrupt and inefficient, he froze the modernization of the army and changed Chief of Staff 6 times by 1914. Still, despite these weaknesses, Russia planned to invade eastern Prussia with 2 armies totaling 800,000 men. But Germany was determined to retain this vital territory. Max Hoffmann, anticipating that the Russian army would have to split around the Masurian Lakes, considered 2 reactive tactics: a retreat or a frontal assault on either flank. Outbreak. Archduke Franz Ferdinand's assassination on June 28, 1914, led Austria to seek Serbia's annexation, with German backing on July 5th. Austria's ultimatum on July 23rd, followed by a declaration of war on July 28th and Belgrade's bombardment on July 29, provoked Russia to mobilize on July 30th to defend Slav interests and its prestige. Germany's ultimatum to Russia on July 31st intensified the crisis. War pressed against every frontier. Chapter 6, August 1st, Berlin. Kaiser Wilhelm decreed general mobilization at 5 p.m. on August 1st, initiating the invasion of Luxembourg at 7 p.m. However, an opportunity to change this course and the 20th century emerged shortly after 5 p.m. when Foreign Minister Jagow and Chancellor Beckmann Hollweg unexpectedly received a telegram from Ambassador Lichnowsky stating that Britain would remain neutral if Germany did not attack France. The Kaiser immediately sought to alter the war plan. Now we can go to war against Russia only. We simply march the whole of our army to the east. But an apoplectic Moltke rebuked him. Your Majesty, the war plan cannot be altered. Despite General von Stab's arguing in 1925 that technically 4 of the 7 armies could have been deployed to the Eastern Front by August 15, temperamentally, it is difficult to believe Germany would not have attacked France when der Tag arrived. Lichnowsky's second telegram at 11 p.m. made this point moot. It clarified that Britain's neutrality required Germany to refrain from attacking both France and Russia. Admiral von Tirpitz pragmatically questioned the wisdom of serving an ultimatum to Russia if Germany did not intend to attack it. But diplomatic protocol and military schedules prevailed. The German die was cast. Chapter 7, August 1st, Paris and London. On July 30th, the French cabinet, led by Premier Viviani, made the unprecedented decision, never before taken in history, to withdraw troops 10 kilometers from its borders to avoid clashes with the German army. Germany and Russia immediately sought France's stance in a potential conflict. On the evening of July 31st, German Ambassador von Schorn posed the question through diplomatic channels, while Russian Ambassador Izvolsky pressed President Poincaré at 2 a.m. in his bedroom. Viviani responded to Schorn at 11 a.m. on August 1st, stating, France will act in accordance with her interests. Minutes later, Izvolsky informed the French of Germany's ultimatum to Russia. The cabinet convened and decreed that the general mobilization that Joffre had been advocating for since July 29, and by 4 p.m., the first mobilization posters appeared at Place de la Concorde, with mobilization starting at midnight. The British cabinet was divided over whether to support France in case of war. The 4 liberal imperialists, Asquith, Grey, Haldane, and Churchill, believed Britain's national interest lay in supporting France, while the Little Englanders, led by Morley, were suspicious of any foreign adventures. Asquith patiently balanced the mounting tensions. At the July 31st cabinet meeting, Grey threatened to resign if Britain chose neutrality over supporting France. The next day, Lloyd George described Germany's potential attack on France as requiring only a little violation of Belgian territory. 4 Little Englanders, Morley, Burns, Simon, and Harcourt, proposed to resign if Britain implemented the naval agreement with France, and the cabinet did not authorize Grey and Churchill's actions. Nevertheless, Churchill, who smelled battle afar off like the war horse in Job, had already ordered the British fleet to its war stations at Scapa Flow on July 28th and persuaded Asquith on July 29th to authorize the warning telegram, initiating the precautionary period. After the cabinet denied him further authority, Churchill mobilized the fleet upon learning that Germany had declared war on Russia. Grey, sensing that the Little Englanders might only be persuaded that Belgian neutrality was violated, asked France and Germany on July 31st if they would respect Belgian neutrality. France responded positively within an hour, but Germany remained silent. Chapter 8. Ultimatum in Brussels. On the morning of August 2nd, 1914, German Minister Klaus von Below-Saleske assured Foreign Minister d'Avignon that Belgium had nothing to fear from Germany, despite the invasion of Luxembourg. That evening, Below was asked to open the sealed envelope he had received from Berlin on July 29th. It contained Germany's ultimatum. Dumbfounded, he presented it to d'Avignon at 7 p.m., expecting a reply by 7 a.m. the next morning. This carefully crafted document asserted that France was about to enter Belgium to attack Germany, which in reaction would anticipate this attack to assert its self-defense rights and have to pass through Belgium. Were Belgium to resist, it would be treated as an enemy. King Albert was less surprised than Below. In November 1913, Kaiser Wilhelm and General Moltke had conveyed to him their readiness to wage war against France, citing constant provocations. Despite the poor state of its army, which consisted of only 6 infantry and 1 cavalry division, no heavy artillery, no clear war strategy, and 4 different mobilization plans, Albert remained resolute. Our answer must be no, whatever the consequences. As the Belgian officials were busy drafting the reply, the German government had second thoughts. Fearing that Belgian resistance would disrupt the critical operational schedule towards Paris, it instructed Below to persuade the Belgians to comply. At 1:30 a.m. on August 3rd, during a surprise visit to the Foreign Office, he used the fake news of French dirigibles bombing Nuremberg to imply that France would next invade Belgium. Unconvinced by this last-minute logic, Belgium formally rejected the German demand on August 3rd at 7 a.m., being firmly resolved to repel every attack upon its rights. That evening, angered by the Kaiser's dismissive reply to the last-minute appeal he had sent on August 1st, Albert ordered the destruction of bridges and tunnels to impede any German advance. Chapter 9. Home Before the Leaves Fall. August 3rd and 4th were key action days. The German, French, Belgian, and British political leaders crystallized into national unions, the tensions that had been building up for months, and the German General Staff declared war on France and invaded Belgium. On the political front, at 3 p.m. on August 3rd, Grey revealed to the House of Commons the existence of informal military talks with France and asked it not to stand by and witness a violation of Belgian neutrality and the unmeasured aggrandizement of any power whatsoever. The House responded with overwhelming applause. On August 4th at 9 a.m., an hour after Belgium was invaded, King Albert's question to the Parliament, "Are you unalterably decided to maintain intact the sacred gift of our forefathers?" was met with resounding shouts of "Oui, oui, oui." A few hours later, Viviani's eloquent speech to the joint session of the French Senate and Chamber was greeted with cheers, especially after announcing Italy's choice to stay neutral. Simultaneously in Berlin, the Kaiser famously declared in his speech from the throne From this day on, I recognize no parties but only Germans. At 3 p.m., Bethmann Hollweg informed the Reichstag that German troops had occupied, were perhaps already in Belgium, and admitted publicly this invasion was contrary to international law. After which it unanimously voted for a 5 billion mark war credit and adjourned for 4 months. On the military front, on August 3rd at 6:30 p.m., Ambassador Schoen delivered to Viviani the German declaration of war on France on the ground of organized hostility, alleged French aviators bombing Nuremberg and flying over neutral Belgium, all of which Viviani categorically denied. On August 4th, Germany invaded Belgium at Gemmerich at 8:02 a.m. after its ultimatum was rejected. Moltke, who had anticipated in 1912 that invading Belgium would trigger Britain's entry into the war, was not surprised. Contrary to the Kaiser and Bethmann Hollweg, when Grey sent Britain's ultimatum to Germany and demanded a reply by midnight. The prevalent opinion in all its belligerent countries was well captured by the Kaiser's words to his departing troops: "You will be home before the leaves have fallen from the trees." Only Joffre, Moltke, and Kitchener foresaw a prolonged conflict, with Kitchener predicting the war would take at least 3 years. Such a long time that no one living knows how long. Battle. Chapter 10. Goeben. An enemy then flying. This is the German battlecruiser Goeben, with another ship called the Breslau, were the most active naval units in the first month of the First World War. Tuchman starts the battle section by covering the search by Allied naval forces for the German battlecruiser Goeben in the Mediterranean, which is chapter 10. Here's a chart of the operations, where the Goeben entered the Mediterranean, went back and forth a bit, came up around the south of Greece, where it had battle with some British ships, and eventually wound up in Turkey. The Goeben finally took refuge in the Dardanelles, waters of the then neutral Ottoman Empire. Such naval actions set off diplomatic maneuvers, but the event precipitated Turkey's entry into the war on the side of Germany. The development worked to block Russian import-export via its year-round ports on the Black Sea. That, in turn, led to the disastrous Gallipoli campaign. Chapter 11. Liège and Alsace. Alsace is around here. Liège is right here, just across the border in Belgium. As they crossed the Belgian frontier, the German armies were engaged by the Belgian army in front of Liège. 5 French armies in the east of France and 4 British divisions, known as the British Expeditionary Force, in the south of Belgium. The French were said to be laboring under the delusion that Gallic élan would be crucial in countering German attacks, while the British fought hard at the Battle of Mons. In August, each side deployed its armed forces in order to effect its own strategies, developed in advance of the war, which was discussed in plans. Chapter 12. BEF to the continent. Tuchman describes the arrival in France of the British Expeditionary Force. Chapter 13. Sambre et Meuse. Here. Although delayed by Belgian resistance, the German armies advanced through Belgium and prepared their right wing for the outflanking maneuver. The French get ready for their main offensive in the Ardennes. The BEF advances towards the left flank of the French armies, and the Germans enter Brussels on August 20th. Chapter 14, Debacle, Lorraine, Ardennes, Charleroi, Mons. The French High Command had made incomplete allowances for dealing with the large massed attack by the German army, which now came quickly bearing down on them. It was perhaps through the decisions of Charles Lanrezac, the French Fifth Army commander, who acted in a timely fashion before getting permission from Joseph Joffre, that the entire French line was eventually saved from envelopment and general collapse. Although his pleas were ignored, Lanrezac withdrew his forces at Charleroi from an untenable position and probable destruction, and he redeployed them more favorably. He was later relieved of command. Chapter 15, the Cossacks are coming. Chapter 15 centers on the Russian invasion of East Prussia. Here we have a map of Prussia. Here's the Russian 1st and 2nd Army invading into Prussia. Chapter 16 presents Germany's reaction to the invasion, which culminates at the Battle of Tannenberg. Where the Russian advance is stopped decisively. Tuchman covers the series of errors, faulty plans, poor communications, and poor logistics, which, among other things, decidedly helped the French in the West. For example, the Germans mistakenly transferred from the West 2 corps to defend against what the book refers to as the Russian steamroller. The great misery that developed on the Eastern Front is noted. At Tannenberg, the Russian Second Army is defeated, and followed by another big defeat at the Masurian Lakes, where the other Russian army is defeated. Chapter 17, The Flames of Louvain. Woven into the text about the battles in Belgium are threads of fact that Allied governments would employ in the formation of the West's eventual opinion that Germany had been the aggressor nation against Belgium. Such facts and conclusions would be repeated for the duration of the war and greatly affect the future involvement of the United States. Here are German cavalrymen resting in Belgium, in Brussels. Also here in Chapter 17, The Flames of Louvain, Tuchman places a selection of German views from a variety of sources as to the aims and desires of Germany. She cites Thomas Mann as saying the goal was the establishment of the German idea in history, the enthronement of culture, the fulfillment of Germany's historical mission. Then she then conveys American reporter Irvin S. Cobb's account of an interview with a German scientist. Germany is for progress. German culture will enlighten the world, and after this war, there will never be another. Yet further, a German businessman opines that the war will give Europe a new map, and Germany will be at the center of it. aims similar to the September program. Such outspoken menace worked to solidify opposition to Germany, caused George Bernard Shaw to become fed up at Prussian militarism, and H.G. Wells to condemn the German war god and hope for an end to all armed conflict. Chapter 17, main focus is the German army's atrocities in Belgium, in particular against the historic university city of Louvain. Tuchman frames her remarks by describing the Schrecklichkeit, the German military's theory of terror. Accordingly, in a failed attempt to suppress the illegal Frankterror, which are civilians shooting at German troops, hundreds of nearby citizens at several Belgian towns had been executed. Her accounts of the ferocity of such German army reprisals against the general population and of the willful burning of Louvain, such as its university library, make it obvious why the Western Allies might feel themselves justified to condemn Germany and Germans wholesale. Chapter 18, Blue Water Blockade and the Great Neutral. Chapter 18 describes the British fear that since their island nation was dependent on overseas imports, the German Navy could manage to disrupt their international trade. Although Britain's Navy was superior in ships and experience, perhaps the German Navy's best opportunity for a successful battle was in the first 2 or 3 weeks of the war. However, the German High Seas Fleet Command remained in port and was ordered not to challenge the British warships watching the North Sea. Thus, a substantial control of the world over the world's seaways was then exerted by the British Royal Navy. Surrounding the neutral role of the United States, diplomatic politicking quickly intensified. On August 6th, Washington formally requested the Europeans agree to follow the 1908 Declaration of London, which favored the neutrals' right to trade against the belligerents' right to blockade. Germany agreed. Britain said yes and meant no, and supplemented an order of council on August 20th, the 100th anniversary of Britain's burning of Washington. Despite the equitable intent of international law, Britain sought to receive supplies from America, while its naval blockade of Germany denied the supplies to Germany. Woodrow Wilson had already advised Americans on August 18th to be neutral in fact, as well as in name, impartial in thought, as well as in action, so that America might become the impartial mediator that could then bring standards of righteousness and humanity to the belligerents in order to negotiate a peace without victory in Europe. Both wartime paper profits from a nearby fourfold increase in trade with Britain and France and German folly eventually would later work to cause American entry into World War I. Chapter 19. Retreat. On August 25th, Joffre ordered a general order to form a 6th Army, which was transported to Amiens to support the British and the French 4th and 5th Armies. On August 26th, at the Battle of Le Cateau, the 75,000-strong BEF, led by Smith-Dorrien, lost over 8,000 men, but managed to delay the Germans. The French 5th Army, under Lanrezac, struggled to defeat, regroup, and establish a defensive line. Coordination issues and miscommunications with Field Marshal French added to the chaos and confusion. By August 28th, German commanders, particularly von Kluck, shifted their focus from cutting off the British to enveloping both the British and French forces, significantly impacting the German campaign's progress. By September 2nd, the French armies had fallen back 150 miles from their starting positions on August 24th. Soldiers retreated, haggard, hungry, and exhausted, marching past their own homes, which they knew Germans would occupy the next day. Chapter 20. The front is Paris. August 29th and 30th proved to be the turning points for the French army. On the 29th, Landrezac repelled a German attack at the bridge of Guise. However, Joffre, unaware of this success, could only see his 5th and 6th armies in precarious positions, and the BEF retreating. During this most tragic period in all of French history, Joffre ordered, in wonderful calm, Generals d'Armade and Landrezac to pull back and blow up the bridges over the Somme and the Oise. Next day brought worse news. Russia's Second Army had just been defeated at Tannenberg and 70,000 soldiers taken prisoner. Yet another intelligence report gave him reason to hope. Moltke had decided to transfer 2 German corps, which is 70,000 soldiers, from west to east. Britain also turned a corner at home and on the battlefront. On August 30th, the censor F.E. Smith urged the Times to publish Arthur Moore's Amiens Dispatch, which detailed Germany's advances. This powerful recruitment propaganda landed on a public opinion that had been shaped since August 27th by a rumor that 70,000 Russian troops had been transported across Britain to aid French forces. These soldiers were, in fact, phantom. But the British public's hallucination was so strong that it contaminated France, where droves of Parisians gathered at railway stations to welcome these imaginary Cossacks, and Germany, where it influenced the military command at the Marne as much as the actual troop movements. On the military front, Sir John French informed Lord Kitchener on August 29 that he planned to withdraw the BEF behind the scene due to his waning confidence in the French troops, which were falling back right and left of him. A military misstatement of the truth, after Joffre had just finished telling him the opposite. Lord Kitchener was so shocked by the mere idea that the BEF could retreat, a calamitous act and a violation of the spirit of the Entente, that he confronted French at the British Embassy in Paris on September 1st and persuaded him to keep his troops engaged with the French forces. Britain was turning its corner. As for the German army, it was now within 30 miles of Paris, so tantalizingly close that it was about to distribute to its soldiers a bronze medal inscribed "Entry of German Troops in Paris, 1871-1914. Chapter 21. Von Kluck's turn. Here is German General von Kluck. The French and British forces, united at last, fell on Alexander von Kluck's exposed right flank. Here is von Kluck's turn. It's going this way to catch the French and British armies rather than this way to Paris, which exposed this flank. In what would be the first successful offensive by the Allies. In the subsequent attack, the Germans were forced back north, with both sides suffering terrible losses. Gentlemen, we will fight on the Marne. While Paris had been saved, the war took on a new cast, with both sides settling into a defensive trench system, which cut across France and Belgium, across the Channel to Switzerland. That became known as the Western Front, and over the next 4 years, it would consume a generation of young men. Here is the French General Gallieni, who commanded the French 6th Army that came out of Paris at the Battle of the Marne. Afterward, after Malinois provoked Kluge's turnabout, a gap opened in the German lines, which the Allies failed to exploit as the BEF moved in too slowly, and the German army retreated in time to avoid a piercing. Germany's much sought-after decisive victory was eluding. Moltke and von Kluge attributed this failure to an unexpected power of the French élan, and this extraordinary and peculiar aptitude of the French soldier to recover quickly. A possibility not studied at our War Academy. Beside the morale of the French soldier, 6 strategic and tactical errors contributed to Germany stalling. Number 1, 2 corps were taken out of the West Front and sent east. Number 2, for too long, the German armies tried enveloping the French 1st and 2nd armies by their left wing. Number 3, Kluge outran its supplies and exhausted its men. Number 4, Kluge did not stay level with Bülow. Number 5, Kluge marched back on the Marne instead of forward on the Grand Morin. 6, and finally, and most importantly, by scheduling a 6-week march towards France through Belgium, Germany precipitated 3 troubles on itself. It had to leave some of its forces behind to fight in Belgium. Britain entered the war with its 5 divisions, and the world opinion turned against it. These errors alone gave the Allies a numerical superiority, a first since the Battle of the Frontiers. Further, the French generals rose to the challenge. Joffre's impregnable confidence held the French armies together during the 12-day retreat. Gallieni seized on the opportunity to counterattack, and Clergerie organized 600 taxis to transport 6,000 troops to the front line. And yet, this miracle of the Marne did not deliver France a victory either. The stalemate that ensued sucked up lives at a rate of 5,000 and sometimes 50,000 a day. In August 1914 alone, France lost 300,000 of its 1.6 million soldier army. The deadlock, fixed by the failures of the first month, determined the future course of the war and, as a result, the terms of the peace, the shape of the interwar period, and the conditions of the second round. The Battle of the Marne was one of the decisive battles of the world, not because it determined that Germany would ultimately lose or that the Allies ultimately win the war, but because it determined that war would go on. There was no turning back. The nations were caught in a trap made during the first 30 days out of battles that failed to be decisive, a trap from which there was and has been no exit. Key players. Tuchman refers almost 400 actors in the Guns of August, General Joffre being cited the most on 125 different pages. 30 of them receive a development of their characteristics or background. The 4 excerpts below illustrate Robert K. Massey's remark that Tuchman can imprint the essential nature of the man. Joseph Joffre was a massive and paunchy in his baggy uniform, with a fleshy face adorned by a heavy, nearly white mustache and bushy eyebrows to match with a clear, youthful skin, clam blue eyes, and a candid, tranquil gaze. Joffre looked like Santa Claus and gave an impression of benevolence and naivety, 2 qualities not noticeably part of his character. Joffre's supreme confidence in himself was expressed in 1912 when his aide, Major Alexandre, asked him if he thought war was shortly to be expected. "Certainly I think so," Joffre replied. "I have always thought so. It will come. I shall fight, and I shall win. I have always succeeded in what I do, as in the Sudan. It will be that way again." "It will mean a marshal's baton for you," his aide suggested, with some awe at the vision. "Yes," Joffre acknowledged the prospect with Lasonic equanimity. The next person, the short, stocky, and florid Sir John French, about to take command in the field, was keyed to a pitch of valor and combativeness. His normally apoplectic expression, combined with the light cavalryman's stock, which is a collar, which he affected in place of a collar and tie, gave him an appearance of being perpetually on the verge of choking, as indeed he often was emotionally, if not physically. The next person described was Vladimir Sukhomlinov, who was an artful, indolent, pleasure-loving, chubby, with an almost feline manner, who, smitten by the 23-year-old wife of a provincial governor, contrived to get rid of the husband by divorce on framed evidence and marry the beautiful residue as his fourth wife. And the fourth character was the tall, heavy, bald, and 66-year-old Moltke, who habitually wore an expression of profound distress, which led the Kaiser to call him Der Trauriger Julius, for what might be rendered as gloomy Gus. In fact, his name was Helmuth. Poor health, for which he took an annual cure at Carlsbad, and the shadow of a great uncle were perhaps cause for gloom. Aside from these four men, Tuchman characterizes or gives the background of 27 other people: Franz Joseph Galliani, Louis Franchet d'Aspre, Augustin Dubai, Adolphe Messimy, Raymond Poincaré, Laurent de Castelnau, Michel Joseph Malnori, and Ferdinand de Langle de Kerry. For Germany was Erich Ludendorff, Alfred von Schlieffen. Of the two classes of Prussian officer, the bull-necked and wasp-waisted, he belonged to the second. Max Hoffmann, Friedrich von Bernhardi, Alexander von Kluck, Crown Prince Ruprecht, Crown Prince Wilhelm, Paul von Hindenburg, Maximilian von Prittwitz, and Hermann von Francois. For Britain, she described Jackie Fisher, Sir Edward Grey, Sir Henry Wilson, and Ernest Trubridge. For Russia, she described Grand Duke Nicholas, Nicholas II, and Alexander Samsonov. And for Belgium, she described King Albert. It is worth noting those actors Tuchman cites often, but does not characterize, if only with a few well-chosen words, such as France, Ferdinand Foch, Charles Henri Zac, and for Germany, Kaiser Wilhelm II, possessor of the least inhibited tongue in Europe, Theobald von Bethmann-Hollweg, Max von Hausen, Karl von Bülow, and William Souchon. And for Britain, Winston Churchill, Kitchener, H. Asquith, Richard Haldane, and Archibald Murray. This ends this book report on Barbara Tuchman's book, The Guns of August.